Welcome to, well, I guess another entry in my Hawk and Hatchet series, and I did tease this in my recent mini hatchet comparison video, but up front, this is absolutely not the Tops Max the Mini Axe. But if you're familiar with the Tops Max the Mini Axe, there are a lot of things about this design that are, shall we say, pretty hard to deny. This is, in fact, the Uzi Masada. Well, they call it an axe, but I'm probably going to refer to it going forward as a hatchet or a mini hatchet, because that's how big it is. Kept popping up on my feed on Amazon while I was looking for throwing hatchets. And spoiler alert, it's an awesome throwing hatchet, but they also advertise it as an outdoor camping, hiking, survival tool. So I'm going to try to evaluate it that way and anything else it might be good for. Speaking of which, I kind of feel like I'm the stunt coordinator on a science fiction movie that the prop master handed me this kind of fantasy design and tasked me with figuring out how to turn it into some sort of convincing, pragmatic something. So bear with me. Another thing I need to get out of the way before we continue is the name branding here. When most of you hear the word Uzi, you're going to think of a line of, shall we say, very high-end, high-quality, legendarily so, products of a type that YouTube would really rather me not talk about. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I got demonetized just for saying the word. But those products are made by high-end manufacturers like IWI and FN and others, whereas this came from the Uzi store on Amazon. And I Googled it and I couldn't find it anywhere else but on Amazon. If you go to the Uzi store on Amazon, you will find a selection of, shall we say, kitschy, mall ninja-ish, tactical, not gift items, though they also have a selection of tactical pens that look like they'd at least be functional. And there's another version of this that they advertise as strictly being a throwing axe. It's about $10 cheaper, does not have the G10 scales, just a paracord wrap. Maybe we'll talk about that one in a little bit. But this is clearly labeled as being made in China. So I'm going to say with reasonable confidence that this Uzi doesn't have anything to do with that Uzi and, well, all that potentially implies. All right, let's start where we usually do by talking about the sheath that it came with, which I'm going to say not very good. It's basic nylon sheath, stitched around here, open on the bottom with these three. I'm going to describe them as very stubborn, not very confidence-inspiring retention snaps. No reinforcing rivets. We're going to talk about why that's a problem here in a second. On what I'm going to call the front side, you've got the bright yellow Uzi store logo, which I'm going to say is not doing it any favors aesthetically speaking. On what I'm going to call the back side, there is a single nylon loop for belt or harness carry, and it has been, frankly, quite an adventure to figure out how to best and safest carry and deploy the thing. Most obvious choice was through my belt with the handle hanging downward, but then I have to reach down low, struggle with these snaps, assuming they haven't unsnapped themselves already, and I'm about to lose this thing unexpectedly, but then it is an awkward fumble to rock this out of its sheath, and you can see the immediate problem here. That sharp double-edged bit has cut through most of the top seam. Well, that happened pretty much within the first couple of days. The sheath isn't long for this world unless I repair it. But yeah, I'm certainly afraid it's going to do that when I'm carrying it, and that's going to be unacceptably dangerous. I've actually found a little bit more useful and confidence-inspiring carrying it upside down, handle upwards. Doesn't seem as willing to fall out or rock the tip through the bottom of the sheath, believe it or not. Easier to reach the snaps and break them, and then I could just rock the thing out into my hand. It's still a bit of a fumble, but actually I found it semi-functional. But mostly what I'm doing is I'm using the sheath as sort of a mask to carry this in some sort of belt loop carry system. Or another thing I found I could do with it, sounds dangerous as hell, but it sort of works, is insert this much of it into my belt or waistband like a knife for cone carry style. But I'm not going to try to draw it from the sheath that way because of the way that sharp tip is probably going to rock out the top. What I'm going to want to do is just pull the whole thing out and then pull the sheath off, and then I got to figure out what to do with this while I'm using this. So none of this is really working for me. This really needs a much better sheath carry system. For what you're paying for this, you're probably not going to get one unless you make one yourself or pay someone to make it for you. And that means you're going to have to like it that much. Do I? Well, we'll talk about that. Time to talk about the hatchet itself, the specs, build, design features, starting with what did I pay for the thing? Well, as of making this video, it's going for around $30 US on Amazon, though that might change depending on what's going on in the world. And as I mentioned, you can get a throwing version of this without the G10 scales for about $10 less. But for about 30 bucks, I'm getting, well, mystery stainless steel. They don't say what it's made out of. My test files say it's probably around a 53 HRC hardness, which is good for a throwing or chopping tool. We'll talk about how it's held up. But speaking of held up, it does have a blackened finish, which has proven to be impressively durable. I've done a lot of throwing, a lot of chopping, a lot of other utility use. I've been really hard on it, and it's barely sort of weathered looking. Now it is slabo steel construction with handle scales. Your main bit is about 3 inches long, 7.6 centimeters, with a secondary top bit that's more like 2 inches, 4 centimeters. You can see that these are fundamentally hollow ground with a very keen edge bevel to them. And yes, I have improved and repaired it a few times. We'll talk about that in the performance and testing section. Speaking of improved, on the back, they call it a reinforced spike. It's hollow ground, but it came with about 1 millimeter of blunt on it. I went ahead and sharpened it just to see what I could do with it. As for the other specs, tip to tip, that is about 10.5 inches, 26.6 centimeters, which puts it in the same size class as those other sort of slab O steel mini hatchets that I recently tested, but it is about an ounce or 2 or 3 lighter than those. Why? Because the stock steel on those other hatchets were 5 or 6 millimeters thick. This is only 4. Which for me is more like a knife than a hatchet. And we'll definitely see how that works or doesn't for it. But let's go ahead and talk about the build. Before we talk about the design and the build, let's take a moment to mourn the apparent demise of the Tops Max the Mini Axe, which I've heard has been discontinued. I've never had my hands on one, but yeah, they clearly took the shape of this from the Max. But I'm going to assume that the Max, much better steel, probably much better build, and functional design. Okay, that's going to start with the friendly end. The Max has what looks like pretty stout, rounded, substantial G10 scales that go up much higher. So when I'm choking up high on this, getting my hand behind the beard for close work, top of my hand is grabbing sharp corners of tang. There's some jimping back there, but yeah, we'll talk about how a high grip like this really isn't working for me. I do have to grip it lower, but just the choices they made with these G10 scales. I think they went for form, design over function, which gets us back to hot spots. The scales are undersized for the tang, so I have sharp edges sticking out all the way around. Did those create hot spots? We'll talk about that in handling, but one spoiler, this extended lanyard loop sticking out the bottom is problematic in a couple of different ways. But the scales themselves create their own sets of hotspots. When they came to me, very, very sharp corners all the way around. I've done a lot to file and sand them, dehorn them, round them off. But even then, you've got these kind of decorative grooves in here that are also very sharp edges. They put corners in a lot of weird places. So using this barehanded, I've had to really learn how to work with it. Again, I've done a lot of dehorning to make it more comfortable, more functional. But the bottom line, I feel like this needs a better grip on it. Maybe just wrap over the existing grip or something like that would make it more useful as a tool. As for the top end design, we'll talk about that more as we get into performance and handling. So let's go ahead and get straight into the testing. Before we do a quick edge test, I've had this for several months and I put it to, well, a lot of attempted uses, shall we say. Throwing, chopping, it seems to imply by design and edge profile that it would be useful for chopping as well as slicing, carving, cutting. So I've tried to use it to cut up packaging and other sort of utility tasks, use it to do some carving. And I admit, well, probably not very good steel involved here. Hardness, again, is only about 52, 53 HRC. I've had to resharpen, improve, refresh, and yes, even repair this edge multiple times. On day one, throwing, I actually took a chunk, about 1 centimeter, out of the edge bevel there at the tip. It was only about 0.5 millimeter deep. They're really easy to repair, but yeah, that kind of worried me. Now, chips like that have not repeated. Let's see where it is now against some paper. Yeah, you keep that edge fresh. It's pretty slicey. Better than a knife? No. How about some cardboard? I'm trying to figure out just how to hold the thing to make the best use of the edges has been a challenge. But yeah, I mean, you could use it for this. Is it in any way, shape, or form better edge and mechanically speaking than a knife? No. Okay, I'm going to try the newer format where I break down the test results as we go versus showing you all the footage and then explaining it later. Starting with, okay, I tried what I would normally do in terms of my first martial tests with a knife or a sword. I started with Mapel, which is multiple layers of thick cardboard backed up by a couple of inches of compressed paperback paper up against my redwood target. And then to test that tip into harder media straight into the redwood, and I figured, okay, let's use it as a choppy tool going in straight with the point of the bit. That worked really well. But then I also choked up on it, almost used it like a punch dagger. I could make it work, but if I choke up too high, I'm getting steel tang right back into my hand. That was especially unpleasant going straight into the wood. Now, going straight into the wood, I was a little bit worried about damage, but it didn't take any. I think the bigger problem was sometimes it bit in and I had trouble getting it out. I also went ahead and flipped it around and tried the spike on the back, and that wasn't bad. I can see that as being a reasonable backup weapon, and we'll talk about that potentially more in martial handling. And then, of course, going on to throwing. And it is a very nice throwing tool, but it flips a lot quicker than even some of my other hatchets of this size, and a lot of that is because of of that. It acts as a hook to really catch the edge of my hand. With any of my hatchets that have this forward recurve kick to it, it tends to hook my hand on release and therefore spin naturally faster. You add that on, this thing flips quick. So yeah, I was getting a full rotation in only 10 to 12 feet consistently. But when it bites into the target, yeah, it really confidently bites in the target. That is a great angle of engagement for throwing. I am a little worried about how keen that tip is, but after that first chip I took off of it day one and easily repaired, it's held up, including the finish, has held up to doing a lot of throwing with it. So that's impressive. Well, speaking of edge durability, I went ahead and did the bamboo test. See if I can induce chip or roll, and no, into that media I didn't have any problem with it. I was just a little worried about that. But I also had some of the same challenges that I've had with using, instead of a sword or a knife or something like that, using something where I really have to be careful about my range, my measure, because I've only got that much to engage the target with. If I short stroke it, I'm either going to miss or I'm going to get a tip slash, and hey, a tip slash with this, well, we're going to see that test here in a second, could be pretty impressive. If I go long, I'm going to hook the thing. And we'll talk about how I could certainly make use of hooking with this, but I better be ready for it. It better not happen as an unexpected accident, or I won't respond as quick as I need to be to make that effective. But moving on to utility tasks. Like I said, I've tried to do some utility cutting and some packaging and things, but let's go ahead and start with chopping. Used a couple of different diameters of logs, tree trimmings that I had, starting from about that thick down to about that thick, down to, more like, 3/4 of an inch. And it actually had really good bite, and the way it recurves forward does seem to assist the way it bites into the target. But that keen edge does make it stick in the media. And yeah, that hollow grind does, I feel, create a little bit of resistance the deeper it gets into the media, which gets me to, is it better than a traditional hatchet or axe? Absolutely not. But as I introduced in the mini hatchet review comparison video, is it better than a big choppy knife of a similar size? Is it better than a Becker?
Is it better than a Becker?
And I'm going to say kind of similar result, but in terms of mechanics, ergonomics, familiarity, the big knife is my go-to tool compared to this. I'm trying my best. Again, I'm like the stunt coordinator on the science fiction movie that's trying to figure out how to make the best pragmatic use out of this fantasy weapon that somebody designed, and I don't know. Apparently the Max the Mini Axe, people like that. So if you have one, tell me why. Moving on to things like carving and fine carving.
Okay, sharp corners are a little uncomfortable, but the edge is not terrible. How about fine carving? Edge ain't bad though. How about that little corner? Use that for anything? Maybe. With improvement.
It was okay, but the biggest challenge is how to grip it to make the best use of the thing. I can actually do some push-cut scraping with that top bit. That's not too bad. If I get too high behind it again, it's uncomfortable, not very secure to hold on to, so I've been gripping it more like right there. I wish the grip went up just a little bit higher to get behind that bit. I could make some use out of it. Is it better than a big knife? Is it better than a Becker? No, but if it's the only tool I've got, yeah, I could make some use out of it. Also tried flipping it around and trying to make some different carvy uses out of that, and yeah, I could. It's just a very interesting piece of mechanics that I feel like we need to talk more about in martial handling. But before we get to that, one final set of tests I ran, which are similar to tests I do with more of my martially oriented implements. I got out the cardboard sheets, which give me a similar result to cutting water bottles. And I did two things. One, I tried to cut clean through the panel. And it made some impressive cuts, but there was so much hooking action, it did consistently just pull the target off the stand. But then I figured, with this geometry, tip slashing. And yeah, tip slashing was really impressive. So let's go ahead and talk about, well, all right, real quick, one thing I forgot to mention in the testing, we talked about some of the hot spots in the grip, some of which I've made better by dehorning it. Really feel like it overall needs a better grip, especially under impact. And one thing that really did consistently bite me, I had to be careful. If I choked down too far while I was chopping, yeah, that loop cut right into the bottom of my hand. Very unpleasant. So that took a little bit of reach out of the tool. But, okay, back to my challenge. I am the fight coordinator. The prop shop has handed me this Klingon-looking thing. Make it convincingly useful. And again, the Max the Mini Axe was appreciated for its utility and martial potential. Now, as for this, if we talk about that balance between utility and martial usefulness, I'm going to personally say I do see more potential as a martial implement, and I actually kind of like it. Having that forward curve and forward kick. One thing I want to have you take a look at, if you look at kind of the angle of the blade compared to the angle of my hand, it does remind me quite a bit of a kukri in the forward grip. So it puts a lot of chop into a strike, And as we saw in the testing, huge potential for making use of tip slashing. If you get that bit on target right, it really stabs as well as cuts into the target. So being able to strike from a lot of different angles. But you do have that range issue where you have to calculate that just right against a moving target in a chaotic situation under adrenaline. If you short stroke it, well, I can come back with the top bit, so there is that. And push and thrust and do things like that. Back cut with it very effectively. If I come up a little bit close, yeah, I can hook with it. That's a really good hooking angle to be able to temporarily control a limb or a weapon, to be able to make use of something you might be doing with your other hand or have in your other hand, or again come back with a quick rapid attack, whether that's with your primary bit, with the top, or even being able to come back around with, well, the way this is forward curved, it's like some of my knives that have a great forward curve to them don't really work very well if I reverse it. If I flip this around and try to use it this way, I can make it work, and I've made it work as a tool, but yeah, I feel like it has just a bit too much curve to work very well to employ the spike on the back. But again, some changes to the grip or some other things about the design might help that out a little bit. It's got some good potential also for pushing with the shapes on the top and making some control use there. Could I slap with the flat of it? Potentially. It's a little twisty and not very heavy to feel like I could do that. Don't feel like I've really got a substantial enough length to try to really intercept another weapon, but again, I could hook one, especially if I was able to engage with something I'm using in the other hand, either an improvised pairing device or another weapon. There are a lot of things I could make use of there, martially speaking. I could even punch with this, well, very inconvenient point of the lanyard loop, and yeah, strike with the corner of the bottom of it. So I've got really good use there. Choking up on it, again, I don't want to get too high because it gets uncomfortable. But if I choke up to there, which is also something that might happen if I switch hands, yeah, I can slash with it, I can punch with it. So there are some uses I can make out of it in a high grip, and my thumb locks over the top of the scale very nicely. What about reverse grip? All right. I'm only going to transition this thing for now with two hands. Could I pinch flip it? Yeah, not very smoothly. But if I happen to grab it this way, I'm going to say it's a bit awkward like this. I could probably make some use out of it in a low grip. In a high grip, I'm going to say it's almost like a weird, oversized karambit, but probably not as good. I could make some use out of it if I happen to pick it up this way. If in an emergency, this is how I grabbed the thing, this is how it was in my hand, yeah, I could make some use out of it. Even hook a little bit with that too. Again, it's one of those things where I feel like I'm the fight coordinator on a science fiction film and trying to figure out how to create a martial art around this design. So it's been a very interesting process, and I do kind of like the results I'm getting out of it. Better than other things, and again, maybe we'll bring this back and compare it to some of the other hatchets and hawks that I've got. Who knows? Will I make some improvements to the design? Who knows? Will I make some improvements to the sheath? I'm probably going to have to if I'm going to keep carrying the thing around in my forest of a backyard. But, all right, let's go ahead and cut it off here before it gets too long. If you have any questions or thoughts on this, or again, if you happen to have the Tops version, please tell me about it. Maybe I'll have to go hunting after one if it's that good. But otherwise, you will be seeing more Hatchet and Hawk content going forward. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, liking, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, adding to our conversation, seeking me out on social media, and I hope to see you back for, well, it won't be this weird, I promise.